Right, so hi everyone. Welcome to our first Halftime Club webinar. So this is our first one, so hopefully everything goes nice and smoothly, and we look forward to also getting feedback afterwards in terms of how you felt it went and any room for improvement that you think could be put into place going forwards. So first of all, to introduce myself, my name's Tom, and I'm the Coach Development Officer at Essex FA, and we also have Sam, who will be helping do the administrative side of the Q&A function. So he'll post a message to me for me to respond throughout the webinar. So the reason behind these halftime clubs was to sort of close the gap, I guess, between some of the principles of play, if you're aware of them, and how we might also support our learners or our players in our own setting with some of the technical detail and how we can coach that. We'll also look at how we can utilize this information to support ourselves using or developing and designing sessions and practices that bring to life certain principles of play. So as people start coming in, we'll get started anyway. So in terms of how the workshop will break down, so the first things we'll look at is the principles of play, the importance of penetration, breaking down penetration to some components that may be useful for you to consider when you plan your sessions and also when you observe your players play the game and enjoy your practices, hopefully. We'll look at how we can exploit space and gaps, and we'll also define what space is and what it could look like for different people, especially at different ages and different formats. We'll look at designing a session to support penetration and bringing that to life, and then also zoom in into a little bit more detail. So hopefully we'll shine a bit more of a spotlight onto some of the key technical attributes that may be required for individuals when they're exploring on the pitch this principle of play. And then finally, some considerations when coaching. So some of you may be aware about the principles of play. So we're going to have a look first of all. So the principles of play exist no matter what, and what they are fundamentals of the game. So no matter what game you watch, no matter what practice you observe that has a game realistic sort of interpretation, these things will always be present. So we can split the game up into two simple parts. So we have the attacking principles and we have the defending principles. Now, penetrate on the left-hand side is coloured in yellow to elevate. That's the one we're looking at today. But there's also get creative. There's also how we might use movement. There's also support play, and there's also create space. When we don't have the ball, this is considered defending. So the defensive principles are delay, press and pressure, be patient, how we provide cover, how we might be compact, and how we get the balance right. So I'm not going to break down each of these components right now, the principles, but what I will do is begin to share some QR codes on screen. So if you're viewing this through your laptop and you have your phone spare, that you can do this, but also Sam will drop the link into the Q&A function for you to access. And I'll also, at the end of the webinar as well, we will in due course send out a communications with these links on as well. So you can take a little bit of a deeper dive into these areas when you have some time to. So like I said before, the principles of play exist no matter which game of football you watch. However, they can be applied in varying ways depending on your style of play. So what I mean by this, for example, and hopefully this is a really simple example and something that might be obvious, Liverpool, if we look at a defending principle, may choose to press closer to their opponent's goal, and they may do this with a lot of energy and intent. Whereas a team, someone like Atletico Madrid, for example, may choose to press when the ball is closer to their own goal. So just on that, so the principles of play are also a useful way to diagnose and resolve football problems that may arise in the game. So therefore, if something is going amiss within the game, you are coaching and observing, the likelihood is that one of the principles of play is not being applied effectively. So we speak about the principles of play exist no matter what. So it is important to recognize that also these principles don't exist separately to each other. They are always interacting together. So for example, to create space, I probably need to use movement. In addition, whilst your team are trying to create opportunities to hurt the other team, we also have to remember the other team are also trying to do something to us to stop us doing that, and vice versa. So what is the importance of penetration? So I guess some of what I'm about to say might sound quite obvious, but I think it's really important to highlight the importance of penetration as an attacking principle. So first of all, to score a goal, we must find a way past the opposition towards their goal. On the flip side, to stop the other team from scoring, we must stop them from finding a way to our own goal. Therefore, penetration is required to score goals. Penetration has to happen for us to score a goal on the pitch. Likewise, denying and restricting penetration is required to stop the other team scoring against us. So hopefully, that again, that this might sound obvious, but hopefully I want it to resonate with you throughout the whole webinar, the importance of penetration as an attacking principle. So if we want to support, especially young players, with understanding what penetration is, sometimes you might hear phrases like think forwards, go forwards. However, we may need to break it down a little bit more for them to help them seek out opportunities within the practice or the game, and also then that then provides them opportunities to exploit these scenarios. So to penetrate the other team, we must either go through, around, or over something or someone. So for example, the ball may travel through, around, or over. A player with the ball may travel through, around, or over, and a player without the ball may travel through, around, or over. Now, when we think about the term over and we think about a player without the ball, this could be, for example, someone jumping in the air over someone. If they're traveling the ball, this could be jumping over a slide tackle. So even though it might not be as obvious with involving a player, the over one, it's just something to consider within your practices. So a player without a ball, therefore, can also penetrate through and over, and it is important to consider how the different football techniques, with and without the ball, such as passing and running, can be used to penetrate the opponent in varying ways. So, for example, I may pass over someone, I may pass through them, I may travel with the ball, I might run, I might finish in different ways, I may stand still, walking, jogging, crossing, turning. So, and by the way, there's a lot more finer detail that we can go into today. But just as an ideal, we're just going through this to start off with. So just something to sort of trigger some thoughts around what penetration is and how the actions and techniques can be linked towards them. So I'm now going to encourage you to use the Q&A function during the webinar. So I want you just to think about some of these pictures and also think about some players that you may know or may have seen, and possibly this could be within the Premier League or any level that, so can you think of some players that may travel and pass through, around and over in different ways? And I'd really appreciate if you could use the Q&A area to write down and share your thoughts. So I'll give you a couple of moments. Thanks, Mark. So we've got Lionel Messi. So Lionel Messi, for example, may dribble through. He likes to scoop the ball over, especially when he was finishing. Got Lauren James there as well. Yep, Kevin De Bruyne. Thanks, Brad. So in terms of notoriously he switch a play or he's crossing from deep. He used to go around the opposition and over them, and sometimes also through. One more minute. Yeah, that's a good point, Michael, regarding David Beckham. I think it comes back to, again, the importance of recognizing that it's not just the ball that can travel around or, around, through, or over. It's also players with the ball at their feet and players without the ball. So someone who might not be as quick necessarily to run with the ball may be really effective at penetrating just simply with their technique. Yep, Ronaldo and Roberto Carlos. Yep, Johan Cruyff. Okay, thanks all. So we're just going to move on now, and now we're going to start to look at spaces and what they are. Yeah, good point, Ramon. Yeah, around Alisson, the goalkeeper. Yeah, exactly. And I think when we say don't forget goalkeepers, I think especially now where the goalkeeper starts the attack and generally now maintains the attack a lot more. I think it's really important to remember that they can use their hands. They're one player on the pitch that has the advantage of using their hands, and especially if we speak about being able to set attacks off quickly and be involved in play when the ball's in the hand, it can't be put under pressure. So something to consider with your goalkeepers. They're a really important part, an integral part of the team. So before we shine a spotlight on how we might build some sessions to promote penetration, I think it's really important to consider what space is and what it could look like depending on how you look at it and interpret it on the pitch. So on the screen now we have a bird's eye view. So it's not perfectly on top of it, but just sort of a perspective that you might see like a match on TV. So from a higher angle. And I think it's really important to say this angle we're looking at now, we get to see everyone in their positions. And depending on what age group you work with, if you're working with younger players that are possibly half your height, this could be actually the perspective you see things from compared to what the players do. And we'll go into that a little bit more detail. So first of all, space isn't always something that is empty. Space is just simply an area between two things or between objects. So for example, you might be in a tight space, you might be in a large open space, or you might even be in your own space. So for example, like the space between your own legs. So this is important because when we ask players to find space on the pitch, we likely need to be more specific with our description. For example, can we stand somewhere where an opponent isn't? Or can we stand somewhere where an opponent can't get us within 1 or 2 touches? And it's this way of defining space to players might actually help them get better at things like first touch receiving, dribbling, and different ways they may then penetrate the game. So just looking at the picture now on the screen, can we consider what options may present passing opportunities that are through, around and over? So we have a thick dashed line at the top, we have a small dotted line in the center, and we have a full line at the bottom. So if you wanted to start populating the Q&A function with any of your thoughts on what the what. Thanks, Mark and Paul. Yep, so Paul, we're going to get onto regarding sort of decision making in a moment in terms of penetration, and we're going to look at actually how that might change depending on our perception and our perspective. Okay, thanks all. So looking at the screen now, so hopefully the visuals are quite clear. So the thick dash line would be the through option. So what we mean by that is that ball, if it did get passed into there, would arrive through 2 players, the 2 red players there, into that person's feet. The dotted line, hopefully with the little shadow underneath that gives it a little bit of highlight, is the over. So for example, there may be a way to get it over that red player that may try and position themselves between the ball and that player looking to receive. So we might not be able to play it on the floor this time, we may have to go over the top. And then finally, the thick line would be around. So it's around the outside of people, that's around their shoulders, stuff like that. So now we're going to change perspective. So we're now going to look at exploiting space and gaps, but actually from a player's perspective, a player's eye view, this is what they probably see. And this is really important for me because I think when we support players, when we coach, often as a coach, we position ourselves outside of the practice, which is okay in some instances. But actually, if we want to see and feel what players are looking at in the game, then actually sometimes we need to put ourselves in a position to then find these things out. So all of a sudden, the opportunities to go through, around and over will instantly change as soon as we change perspective. So having a look at this picture, I'd like you to think about so from the perspective of the picture, for example, so the person's hand that you'll see on the screen, imagine they've got the ball about to arrive at their feet. Can you highlight what finishing opportunities there are through, around and over within this picture so they can score into the goal? So imagine the ball's about to land at the feet of the eyes of this player. What opportunities are there within this frame, at least, to finish in different ways, using through, around and over as descriptive terms? So, for example, we may simply finish through on the floor between the opponents and the goalkeeper into the bottom corner, for example. There may, depending if the defensive opposition changes what they do, we may have to go over. We may have to bend it around to get it into a far corner. So I think it's really important to remember that penetration isn't just something to do with passing, it's to do with finishing as well. And these things are really important when we consider different finishes. You know, when we speak about finishes, it's important to remember that just put it where the keeper isn't, put it where the space is in the goal. Not everything has to be across the goal, not everything has to be far post. It just has to be put it in a position where no one can get the ball. And I think as soon as we highlight this to players, they'll begin to explore different techniques, different ways of finishing. So further to this, as I would have mentioned regarding sort of, you know, spaces between people, we're now going to look at spaces that exist within players. So, for example, here we're looking at things like gaps that exist between the legs. These could be gaps that exist over the foot, over the head, around the outside of the knee or the shin pads, for example. And I think if we want players to express themselves and explore different ways to penetrate through, around and over, then we must guide their attention to all these possibilities and also remind that these spaces and gaps will constantly change. So just looking at this picture, just highlight what travelling opportunities are there for this individual on the ball, through, around and over this direct opponent that's deciding to engage them. Yeah, thanks, Brad. Your controlled lob over the player. Yep, excellent. And just think about as well, think about what techniques that begins to highlight. You know, so when we think about what techniques we practice and what do we expose our players to, there might be a lot of times it's on receiving and passing, but actually are we encouraging players to scoop the ball over people's heads, over the knee, over the foot, between the legs? Think about what that then means and sort of implies for your coaching. What do I need to support the players with to exploit these opportunities? So I think it's really important to summarize that first part when we break down penetration, especially perspective is key. What the player pays attention to, what they can technically do at that moment in time and what they've been exposed to, what they value you doing, so what they enjoy. Do they enjoy dribbling, over passing, things like that, for example? And what they feel confident to explore will likely inform how they act and therefore how they penetrate the opponent. I think it's really important as well to remember your role as a coach to encourage these behaviours. Therefore, if we support them from their perspective and meet their needs, we are probably going to help ourselves as coaches better support the individual. We may get to see what they see if we change our own perspective, and we may get to feel what they feel. Sometimes as a coach, we don't take a coaching position where we feel we may get, because we feel we may get in the way of them playing. However, there may be an argument to position yourself in an area so that you can take a similar perspective. So sometimes put yourself in there to then take yourself out, and it might just help you in terms of work out what the players require next to support them. So how can we build a session so to highlight and bring to life elements of penetration? Now, what I didn't want to do with this part here was just provide a list that works for everything. I want it to be really specific to penetration, and hopefully it gets you thinking about the building blocks behind the game of football and also practice design. And I really want to emphasize the word simple here. So because from the player's perspective, the task we set out to them must be clear. So they spend less time working out the practice, but instead they take more time working out how to find solutions. Sometimes they will find this stuff out by themselves, but sometimes they will also need the coach to support them and nudge them along their journey. Your job as a coach is to facilitate learning. And then you can help them then where to look and then how to act. So I have chosen a rectangular pitch just to start off with, just because it happens to look like the shape the players were going to play and feel on a match day. Please feel free to explore different shape areas and see what returns you get. I'm just simply presenting one option and one way. So we're going to start really simply with one player with the ball at their feet. So let's think back to the components of penetration through, around and over. If we want this player to penetrate with the ball, they likely then need an opponent to find ways through, around and over. Okay, so opposition's probably key. Think again to the components. If we want a player to know where to penetrate, then we likely need to add a sense of direction into our practice as well. Now, how you do this depends on the technical actions you want to elevate. So for example, we may have end zones that may support more dribbling actions or receiving actions, whereas using goals may promote more finishing actions. So again, it might sound really obvious what I'm saying, but if we want to elevate certain technical outcomes in relation to the principles and components of penetration, then we need to be really deliberate with our practice design. Finally, if we want to work at passing as a technique and penetrative passing, we need to have teammates. If I don't have another player, I can't share the ball to them. Again, sounds really obvious, but if I'm working at passing unopposed without someone to play to, then we have to consider, am I losing out on some key information for them to practice and interact with on the pitch? Also, like similar, link it to a technical focus. So if you want to work on a certain technique, then you need to ensure your practice brings about that technique to life. Finally, I can also make it more difficult by adding another defender in, for example. In addition, laws of the game are really important. So for those that play with the offside law within their format, you probably may want to consider how you apply that depending on the part of the pitch you want to work at within your practice. So for example, adding a halfway line in will then likely affect how the defending team choose to defend. And also, depending on where I position my halfway line will actually impact what the players get to practice and experience. So if I move the halfway line all of a sudden, I haven't got an equal space no more. And if I have an individual that I want to practice running in behind, because I've increased the space in one end of the pitch, I'm actually allowing them more space to practice their runs through and also their passes through. So when we organise in our practice design, not everything has to be equal in size and equal in shape. It can be anything depending on the needs and depending on the outcomes you want to achieve. So for example, they may work on that little run in there. Now, sometimes, you might hear the terms things like switching play and through balls and things like that. But if we keep it linked to the words we've used so far around through, around, and compared to around and over, how can I elevate the through aspect more within my practice design? So my intention now is to increase the opportunities to play through, whether that's dribbling or passing. So if I want to increase them opportunities, I want to probably limit the opportunity or restrict the around and over options possibly. So I've decided in this instance, this is just one way, for example, I've decided to restrict the width so that the through opportunities are more obvious to the players. Vice versa, if I want to increase over opportunities, I may increase the depth and length of the pitch to include more space in behind or in front, so that we can, again, the opportunities present themselves to go over might be more relevant and more impactful for the players. Finally, if I want to increase the around opportunities, I may take away the depth behind and increase the space in wide areas. So naturally, depending on, again, what you're focusing, if I took the goals away, for example, the attacking won't necessarily focus towards central. It might, if there's just end zones that go across the full width, the way we attack might spread across the full width of that pitch. So again, something really to consider in terms of your practice on how you explore that. And this all links into the STEP framework. So some of you may be familiar with this depending on some of the course you took and some of the articles you may have read regarding how we manipulate and change space, the tasks we provide the players, the equipment we use, and how we organise the people and players on the pitch to bring about the outcomes we want. So if you're not entirely sure, we've got the QR code there, and Sam will also drop the link in the chat for the step framework for you to take a deeper dive into. So I'm just going to use this moment here now just to have a look at the Q&A function, just answer any sort of points that have been made and go through it. So if anyone's got any questions, please drop them in before we move on to the next part. Thanks, Sam. Right, we'll move on to the next slide. So we're now going to zoom into a little bit more detail. Now, I put some, and I've underlined the word some, because detail is dependent on the needs of your players, and generally your players will let you know when they require some more detail within the session or within the game. So I'm just going to highlight a couple of few things. Now, what I'm not going to speak about is what foot you receive it on and stuff like that. What I'm going to speak about is some of the elements we could think about before that, which would encourage our players to explore more techniques. So we're going to zoom into a practice where one team has 2 players. So that's the sash team, and the other team have 1. That's one with the horizontal stripes. For a team to score, they must travel into and stop the ball or pass into a teammate in the opponent's end zone. For the team with 1 player, as they do not have a teammate, they will only be able to travel into the end zone to score. So we're probably elevating that penetration in terms of dribbling. And we may deliberately design activity like this because we may want to support 2 players, for example, to work at passing and receiving, compared to the 1 player that's by themselves to work at their travelling skills. But to start with, our focus is going to remain with the team that has 2 players. So we're going to look at the player on the ball and the player supporting the ball. So the player on the ball, again, might be quite obvious, but is the individual who is in control of the ball. And the player supporting is the individual who is directly available to receive the ball or release pressure for the player on the ball. So the first key technical detail, and this is just my opinion and just one way, for example, is ensuring that the player on the ball is always searching for gaps. Okay, just move this on here. Now, the reason there's a key difference for me between scanning and searching. So scanning is the action of moving the eyes, head and the body to look for something, whereas searching is actually paying deliberate attention to something really specific. So in this case, we are searching for gaps that will help us get into the end zone. The action of scanning will help put ourselves in a position to see these things. Therefore, the player on the ball will likely need to have the ball in a position so that he can exploit gaps when they emerge. This may mean not having the ball too far underneath your own body. Otherwise, you may need to take a touch out of the feet first and exploit any opportunities. And I think then it's key to then, if we have to take multiple touches then to exploit an option, that gap may then change. So we always need to be ready to exploit. But I also want to emphasize that some players will pull a rabbit out of the hat and will surprise you. So this is not to say this detail is a rule. It's just to say something to guide you as a coach to look for. If a player is sort of struggling to exploit an opportunity, consider where the ball is compared to their body. Is it underneath their chin or is it out of their feet, ready to exploit a gap if it comes? So I guess really importantly, then that brings on the next key element is to be ready to change your mind as a player. So gaps to travel or pass through, around or over, will constantly change within the game, especially if there's more defenders and more attackers. This depends on what space is available first of all, and how the opponent moves to try and stop the team on the ball from scoring. To be able to change your mind, you probably need to keep scanning and searching for them gaps. Sometimes players that aren't comfortable on the ball will drop their head, and this will likely limit how effective they can search and change their mind. Therefore, ensuring players are comfortable travelling with the ball with their head and eyes up will probably help players be better at being ready to penetrate in different ways. So again, as a coach, we're not just necessarily looking at now through a run over, we're looking at what will allow the players to see the opportunities to then exploit them. So if their head's up and their eyes are up and they're looking around, then they're probably in a better position to now search for this information. But your job as a coach is still to guide their attention towards them opportunities. So we're now going to look at what the supporting player does. So this is a player that's not got the ball with the sash. So the first thing we will look at is what are they searching for again? And a nice phrase for a supporting player to consider, and this is not perfect by the way, it's just one way of saying it, is where is the ball coming from and where do we want to go to next? This may help the supporting player position themselves in a way where they have sight of the ball as well as sight of the next thing they may want to do. And that could also be the person who's about to challenge them from the opposition. So this will probably likely help their body shape, and it may also help with their ability to see more opportunities to exploit. Lastly, whilst we are looking to support the player on the ball, the opponent is looking to stop us getting there. So they could be stopping us to get in the end zone, or they may be stopping the player on the ball and using the supporting player to help them get success. Therefore, the supporting player must be ready to adapt how they support. On a final note, I've deliberately not used the term passing lanes or channels or anything like that, as I think this is sometimes value passes that only exist on the floor, and especially as we're trying to highlight penetrations through, around and over, I think it's really important to be really deliberate with your language. Try not to let your language limit the interactions that players can have on the pitch. So just because, for example, a player may decide to block or place himself between the ball and the supporting player doesn't mean we can't find a different way to get the ball there. So it could be a pass that goes into space and someone runs onto it with a through pass. It could be we scoop over the top of that player that's blocking. So really, there's no excuse for players not to have a solution to solve a problem. But in terms of your style of play and choice, that might dictate what ones you prioritize over others. But I think if we, especially in the development area, and we especially work with younger players, I think it's really important to let them explore all possibilities. So in terms of going into a little bit more technical detail, we can look at the skill capabilities, and some of you may be aware of these. Again, the QR code's on the screen, and Sam will drop the link into the chat. These things speak about sort of the types of movements, the types of techniques we can use, whether we use the back foot or front foot. I've deliberately not gone into that detail, but actually I really encourage you that once you've been on this webinar, if you feel that I've not given you enough detail, then please let me know in the feedback, and that's something I can tweak in future webinars. And I guess as well, just because we've spoken about some of the details, well, it doesn't mean that these are rules. You don't have to deliver what I've spoken about word for word. Hopefully what I'm doing is just engaging you to think about ways that might be relevant to the context of your players. You need to make sure your players can digest the information, and some of what I say will work and some of it won't work, and some of what you do already works really well already. And it's just being considerate of the fact that you just may have to tweak little bits and pieces to allow the players to explore, especially this principle we're working at today. And you also got to think about with the language you use, that you've got to be positioned ready to develop it. Once your players get comfortable with the language you use, there may be another level you need to go to. So hopefully there's a hunger as a coach to go and find that information out. So some considerations when coaching. So use appropriate language for the age and stage you coach. So with a young individual, for example, I've done before when I speak about pirate ships and the person on the ball has a cannonball at their feet, and the goal, for example, is an evil pirate ship, and you're trying to get the ball into the goal and strike the pirate ship, or the queen or king of their castle. There's all these different ways and terminologies and analogies that you can use that will simplify the game down, but it doesn't remove the complexity of the game, doesn't remove their ability to exploit opportunities. They're still there, but it's fun and it's an engaging piece of language. If you're working with older individuals, you may be a little bit more deliberate and a bit more detailed. But just remember, just think about where they're at, what they need, and adapt it to their context. So let players explore these opportunities to penetrate in different ways. And I think, sometimes as a coach, I think in a modern day coaching world now, sometimes this perception that we need to stand back. If a player is struggling to exploit opportunities, then we need to find out why that might be the case. And actually, we're there to help them. So guide their attention to the opportunities, guide them to opportunities to go through, around, or over, within and between players on the pitch. Always provide encouragement. If you're going to ask people to try something new, that the likelihood is they're not going to get it right all the time. So, it's your fault. You've asked them. You as a coach, you've asked them to do it. So tell the players, look, if it goes wrong, it's my fault. I've asked you. As long as you go out there and you give it your best shot, then we can't take that away. And on that one as well, you never truly know what they've seen. There's a bit of research regarding You know, when you ask players, oh, what did you see there? And they feedback to you, actually, it doesn't always relate to actually what's happened because they're not actually necessarily aware of it themselves. So again, utilize your coaching position on the pitch to support yourself to see different things. But again, you never truly know what they've seen. So that's why encouragement's really key. And have fun trying things out as a coach. I think it's really important as a coach that you're comfortable getting things wrong, comfortable adapting in the moment. You know, just because you plan a session and it's took you an hour, for example, and it hasn't worked out within the first 10 minutes, doesn't mean you're a bad coach. It doesn't mean anything's gone wrong. It just means actually there's a learning opportunity here for me. Do you know what? Let's just stop the practice. Let's change what I need to change. If I'm not getting as many through balls, can I make the space a little bit longer? If I'm not getting as many around balls as I wanted, can I change the dynamic of the practice to bring that about? You know, be comfortable changing and adapting in the moment. That's what the best coaches do. So just coming to the end of the workshop now. So just a little summary. So you must penetrate to score goals. Spaces and gaps exist between and within players. Just because a player is looking doesn't mean they're actually seeing or searching for the right information. If we broke down penetration to simple components, think about through, around, and over. Your job as a coach is to help guide the player's attention to these opportunities. And penetration likely requires direction as an outcome. So I want to say thanks for joining. Hopefully that's been a positive webinar and helpful webinar. We've got a few minutes left anyway, so if you wanted to pop any questions into the Q&A chat box, I'm more than happy to answer. In terms of our next workshop, it'll be around the principle of delay. And we'll look at why delay isn't necessarily the first priority when we defend. There actually might be other things that take precedent. But that'll be on Friday the 24th of November. That'll be midday to 1 o'clock again. And then a little fast forward towards Friday the 8th of December, we have a little look and deeper dive into support play. And then the following week after that, on the 15th of December, we speak about press. So just a little thing going forward in terms of Essex FA. I don't know if you're aware, but there's a new play phase qualification that has come out, which is aimed towards younger age groups, which is essentially what is play for the younger age groups and what does it mean to them. And it doesn't necessarily mean it has to be with the football. It could be in lots of different ways to get them engaged in sport and exercise and activity. Also, we've got the Playmaker and obviously the Pathway. Obviously, this webinar, the Half-Time Club, will continue going forwards. So that will be, we're looking to get that accredited CPD hours. So hopefully there'll be an hour CPD and that will come onto your fan account soon. But also we run the Your Club program and Youth League. So if you do want to drop us an email, obviously go to the Essex FA website and you'll find all the contact details there. So yep, just a thanks everyone for joining. If you've got any questions, again, please populate the Q&A. Otherwise, thanks for your time and enjoy the rest of your day.